Now, a couple of months ago, something happened in a state that I visited only once. And I think I was on my way to the Black Hills. The name of the state is South Dakota. And it's been losing people for a long time because they're all heading for Arizona, California, Florida, and wherever else it may be. But this state has certainly made the news because the people in this state, or many of them, and certainly many of the legislators in the state, are all fired up with the possibility that with the recent changes in the Supreme Court, that something they hate will be overturned. What they hate was a decision made on, or issued, I should say, on January 22nd, 1973. Some of you may be dimly aware of that date. On January 22nd, 1973, the decision which has this name, which has now become sacred in the world of liberals, Roe versus Wade, right? And the decision of the Supreme Court, and at that time the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court was a liberal, and in fact the court decided 7-2 that indeed a woman in the United States of America has the right to choose an abortion. And in fact, that right is derived from the Constitution of the United States of America, and there is a right to privacy, if you will, and therefore all the laws in all the states, at that time there were like 49 states that had banned abortion. All those laws were now unconstitutional. They were invalid. So it was, from certainly the liberal point of view, an absolute triumph. But these people in South Dakota hate it. They've hated it for a long time. And they haven't felt that the time had come to do anything about it. So now they have passed a law which is clearly invalid if Roe versus Wade is maintained. But if Roe versus Wade is overturned, so they have to be pretty confident about it, right? So let me tell you about Roe versus Wade. Roe versus Wade was issued on January 22nd, 1973. It was a year in which the President of the United States was a Republican whose name was Richard Nixon. It was during the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War did not end until 1975 and the evacuation of Saigon by the Americans, but there was a level of exhaustion. But what happened in Roe versus Wade didn't happen just like that. Let me tell you about the Constitution. I've never been crazy about constitutions because constitutions, like Bibles, are collections of words. And any clever lawyer can make them mean, or clergyman, can make, you understand, can make it mean whatever you want it to mean. On the whole, decisions made by the courts reflect in some way public opinion. The courts generally do not decide that something is appropriate unless there is some substantial part of public opinion supporting it, because they themselves are the products of public opinion. So, in the 1890s, they interpreted the Constitution. It meant what? Segregation of the races. They looked at the same document. They're looking at it. Can you extract segregation from the Constitution? Yes. And then they looked at it again in 1954, do you understand? And what they say, what they see. They're looking at the same text. Have you ever known people who first make their conclusion and then go to the text to find their support? So that's what the Constitution is a collection of words. Any group of people with an opinion and who are clever enough can go to that document and what? Extract the support you want. You can do the same thing with the Bible. You can go there. If you're a conservative, you will find conservative conclusions. If you are a liberal, you will find what? Liberal conclusions. So, it's called kosherizing. A word not used by our founding fathers. So in the end, there was obviously a buildup. There had to be some substantial portion of public opinion who were supporting this idea. I mean, even in 1954, when they changed the things, black liberation was already beginning. I mean, all those blacks who had served in segregated units in World War II had come home. I mean, there was a momentum for change, and the black liberation movement was going to explode. So what was this buildup? Well, the buildup was the black liberation movement, which triggered the beginnings of the trauma of the 60s. Do you remember the 60s? I mean, it was, of all the decades in the 20th century, it most likely was the most dramatic, all right, in terms of visible change. Maybe not in terms of real change, but in terms of visible change. And the black liberation movement was accompanied by the turmoil of the Vietnam War. And that was accompanied by what I call all the liberation movements. The 60s, youth liberation, sexual liberation, and above all, and it did precede Betty Friedan. I mean, she was a great lady, but I mean, she didn't invent it, all right? It's called feminism, do you remember? And I assure you that without feminism and its political influence and its constituencies and its command, if you will, of what I would call the major intellectual forces in the United States of America in the 60s, it's highly unlikely that Roe versus Wade would have been decided. It wasn't that they just looked at a text and said, aha, we see something we didn't see before. Always remember that. When people say they always rely on the Constitution and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court changes, the Constitution is only a what? A document you can interpret. And if you don't have public opinion, and public opinion has the power, if it wants to amend the Constitution. So, there it was, and part of the buildup was already in the 60s. I remember it because I participated. I was very young, but no. It was in the 60s. It's called clergy. Remember all those clergy resistance? You could come, and they would counsel you on how to get an abortion, where you can go to Canada, go over here, whatever it be. And it was thoroughly illegal, but the clergy did it. It was an act of defiance. People were doing it all over the place. It was the 1960s. Without the 1960s, Roe versus Wade would not have existed. It would not have been issued at all. Now, in order to understand this decision and the issue, we have to realize it's connected to something. Abortion doesn't stand by itself. In the eyes of its enemies, it is connected, either consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously, whatever phrase you prefer, with something broader. It's called the movement of female liberation, of feminism. Do you understand? I mean, because the hostilities generated by it can only be explained by some kind of very deep, profound hostility that's more than simply this narrow issue. So let me just for a moment, as background to the decision, talk about the issue, the roots of the feminist movement. The roots of the feminist movement lie in what I call the traditional world. The traditional world existed for 10,000 years. And ever since agriculture was invented. Once agriculture was invented, people settled down in villages, and all of them did farming. And the basic social unit of the agricultural village was the extended family, which was governed by Papa. Now, in that agricultural environment, and this is tradition, in that agricultural environment, what was needed above all was cheap labor. And the major source of cheap labor were children. The more children, the more they work. Today, who please? They don't even mow the lawn. I mean, no. I mean, you don't expect them to. They're just little creative opportunities. But but historically, I mean, that's what they were. That's why you had so many. And with a high mortality rate, you just had to what? Keep producing more and more and more. The more children, the more workers. Free work. They weren't exactly free. You had to feed them. I mean, in my childhood, I remember vestiges of the system. The kids in my neighborhood whose parents had grocery stores, and they had to go, no, they had to go and work there, right? That's what it meant to be part of a family. All right. So, you have to produce them. So now you have the role of women. In this economic system, the role of women is to produce, do you understand, as many children as possible, to give birth to them and to raise them so that they will be adequate workers, and so raise them that they, in the end, when you grow old and tired, will stay home and take care of you. Something we no longer expect for all the investment of energy. Do you understand? Gone. The whole system. The reason why we don't understand it is because it's totally divorced from anything that we are now experiencing, although some of us have vague, dim memories of something left over from the old system. So, to stand up in a village, you're a woman. It's inconceivable almost, but let's imagine. It's 1312. You're in central France. My name is Violette, and I'm in charge of my life. Right? I'm in charge of my life. I am the master of my destiny. I am entitled to be autonomous, and I will do with my life what I want. I don't care what my mother and my father want me to do with my life. I will pursue my happiness as I see fit. And if I don't decide to stay in this village, I won't stay in this village. I'll take an apartment in another village. And I may choose to get married, and I may not choose to get married, and I may choose to have children, and I may not choose to have children. Do you understand, Pierre? Otherwise known as Daddy. Okay. Can you imagine? Do you understand? I've heard that speech over and over and over again. I mean, how do you put that speech into the 14th century, into this agricultural? It doesn't exist. Nobody can make it. So, women grew accustomed to this role. Therefore, any form of birth control was unacceptable to men. Their wives were their possessions. They were their reproduction machines. So, if she was having trouble with her pregnancy, obviously there was the element of love that entered here. So, I mean, somebody might be concerned. But on the whole, the machine is supposed to what? It's supposed to work. So there are risks, yes, but we got to have those what? Got to have those kids. And then you say, well, no, I don't want to do it. What do you mean you don't want to do it? The point is, it was all reinforced, the system, by something that produced guilt. Have you all experienced that emotion at some time? So this is no sociopaths around here? Good, good. Fine. You've experienced the emotion of guilt. The institution that certainly reinforced all of this was called religion. In fact, if you go to Western religion, in Judaism, what is the first commandment in the Bible? I mean, it's the sixth day, and Adam and Eve have been made in story number 1, and what's his first instruction to them? Paru uravu, be fruitful and multiply. Got it? Not be happy. Are you getting the message here? All right. So what it meant in Judaism was that the role of women was to subject themselves to sexual activity. Hopefully they liked their husband. Marriages were arranged, weren't they? Women were purchased. So hopefully you liked your husband, and hopefully you might fall in love with your husband, and he would fall in love with you, but there was no guarantee. Love and dating. Is that what happened? You got to understand this. You have to get into the system. And now comes religion. There is the clergy, and they have texts and stories. And all of those texts and stories say, you know what? This system is good, and it has been authorized by God. Well, the two derivative religions from Judaism, Christianity and Islam, what? The same thing. The same social system. It's not that first came the religion and then came the social system. First came the social system, and then the religion kosherized the system. Well, you say, in the East, they're different. Oh, they're wrong. I want to tell you, in India, when your husband died, and they burned him, you're supposed to what, as his widow? No, of course, what else? Throw yourself on the flames. So, in fact, your role in life had now what? Ceased. And certainly, even if we go to Chinese culture and we talk about benign Confucianism and whatever, in that society, women certainly could achieve certain levels of power. But on the whole, their role was to produce children. So, any decision to stop or halt reproduction for whatever reason, the only way it could happen would be that your husband decided not to reproduce. That would be the decision. He decided to abstain. But that was not very frequent, I want you to know. Because attached to reproduction, that's the way evolution worked, I didn't design it, is a pleasurable activity called sex, which is supposed to encourage you to engage in acts of reproduction. And so, was there hanky-panky? Mm-hmm. Did women arrange secretly to have abortions? Yes. Did they sometimes deceive their husbands? Yes. and with good justification. The husbands were rotten. But it's not the issue. That's the system, as long as you understand the system. Now, a revolution occurred only about 200 or 250 years ago, which blew up this system, and which took people from the villages, put them overwhelmingly in cities, created a new family, not an extended family, but a nuclear family, and created new children. New children ultimately, hopefully, go to work. But what they have to do in an urban society is go to school. So they don't work for you, you work for them. You work very hard to put them through school, and when they graduate from school, they leave you. I got this new system? No. It's a new system. So now motivations change. Because you have to ask yourself, I mean, obviously there's always the motivation of immortality. You want somebody to what? Survive you. But now you have a whole new motivation system. Your children are not cheap labor. There are very few people I know who stayed in their father's grocery store, or even in their father's business. They went out and they created their own life and they moved wherever they wanted to. So now there's a whole new motivation. And not only that, in the new urban society, there's the new woman. In order to survive, often, women had to go out to work, not because they were looking for a creative opportunity, but because they had to what? They had to work for the family to survive. And in fact, in the act of leaving the house and going to work, they developed a certain level of autonomy. So you got the new children, the new woman, do you understand? And the new motivation for having children. And in fact, in the new urban culture, there now arrives a new set of values, because the economic level of the middle class, certainly in the new urban environment, is much higher than it was in the previous environment when there was almost no middle class. They now ask themselves questions, and men ask the question and women ask the question. Am I happy? Oh. What do I want to do with my life? I've got options. Oh. Did that question ever exist before? Did women in agricultural villages sit around saying, I think I'll be... No. So now we're in an entirely different ball game. And it's the ball game we're presently playing right now. And it is absolutely and totally revolutionary. So, in this environment, women have both the freedom and the desire to say, you know what? I don't think I want more than 2 children. Or I don't think I want more than 1 child, consistent with my life, my happiness, my dreams, my hopes, whatever. Do you understand? That's it. I'm an autonomous person. That's what I am. I may decide to have no children. When I grew up in the 30s, I used to go to the movies all the time. Hollywood in the 30s always had heroines who never had children. Do you know that? Katharine Hepburn never had one. Betty Davis never had one. They never had children. It was all about men and women falling, no, this is the new age, falling in love and family. Children were absolutely like secondary. So now you've got all these people who, all these women who ask this question, and if that's the case, then obviously you may choose not to have them, or have a few, or practice birth control. So now starts the struggle. The struggle is that the society is in transition, and people are just coming off the farm, and they still have the old values. Their life is changing, but their values aren't changing as fast as their life. So they're offering resistance to these women who now reflect the new culture and the new system. So now there comes the struggle. First, the struggle simply to inherit part of your father's property, right? Which used to go entirely to the sons, or they would get 7/8, do you understand? And you would get just a little piece of the property. So then there was the fight over the inheritance. And in fact, inheritance laws were changed. It was part of the first struggle. And then came the struggle to own property. In many cases, the property of women, was controlled by their husbands. They did not manage their property. They brought their dowry, if you will, still, in some ways, into the marriage. They didn't have full control. It took a whole series of struggles, protests, in order to arrange that. And then came the three great struggles. The feminist movement actually began, if you will, in the middle of the 19th century with a very important push. In order to achieve status in an urban industrial culture, you need education. And most educational institutions were closed to women. So now there is the drive to create colleges for women, and then there is the drive for women to enter men's colleges. I mean, the first college that I know of to admit women was Oberlin in Ohio. All right, so was that a struggle? Did the men yield easily? And by the way, your opposition wasn't only men. Your opposition was women, because women were brainwashed by this old system. They had the same values. And then, as you get toward the end of the 19th century, more and more schools and universities opened to women, although I must say that segregated education was generally the rule of the day. So this is a struggle. I'm talking about this struggle. And then the second major thing is called suffrage. We live in a democratic society. Men have the right to vote. Women protest, men answer. And they say, using the value system of the old social system, they say, you have a vote. When I vote for the whole family. Oh. I represent you. You have a vote. The kids have a vote. You have a vote. The whole thing. Don't you understand? Well, that wasn't adequate for certain people. So they went out and they protested. And ultimately, you have the Elizabeth Cady Stantons and the Susan Anthonys and whatever they are, and they're going out and they're protesting and they're demonstrating and they're being assaulted. It is a what? A struggle. And they are ultimately victorious, those suffragettes. When I was younger, I knew a lot of suffragettes. Women who proudly went out to march and demonstrate before Betty Friedan was born. They were out there. And in fact, after the end of World War I, there was an amendment made to the U.S. Constitution. Many states had already, beginning with the state of Wyoming, had already granted suffrage to women. So now there's a long struggle. And then came the struggle about children. It wasn't built around abortion, but the two issues are very distinctly connected. The issue of contraception. Do you remember that issue? I mean, it may seem so long ago, There was a series of laws that were passed in 1873 by legislature, by the United States, and certainly it was reflected in laws passed by almost all the state legislatures. There was a man called Comstock. And here's the old value. You got the new system, but the old value. Because things are changing so fast. What happens when things change very fast is people want to say, whoa. So the law said very clearly, any attempt to ship information about contraception and abortion through the mails is what? Illegal. And then there rose up one of the heroes of the feminist movement. Her name was Margaret Sanger. And she demonstrated, in fact, she wasn't allowed even to denounce things or to talk about contraception. She would stand on public platforms with her mouth taped as a protest. And it was a huge battle. In fact, it wasn't won fully. Many states had laws against the sale of contraceptives, and in fact, couples who engaged in contraception were committing a crime. I mean, it was 8 years before Roe versus Wade that we have Griswold versus the state of Connecticut. Does anybody remember that decision? That was the decision that decriminalized the behavior of birth control, of contraception, using artificial birth control. I mean, the only legitimate form of birth control, obviously, was abstinence. And historically, that abstinence could only be chosen by men. If men didn't want to abstain and women did, is that rape? I don't know. So, and then, so you needed those decisions. All of this is the buildup. Do you understand? There is this struggle. You can't talk about this like abortion. It's all part of the woman discovering a new role, do you understand? A new path for herself, in the same way that men in an urban industrial society have to do the same thing. So, that struggle triggered a movement of resistance. I do want to say this is part of living in this ever-changing society. There are people who do not like change. In fact, they prefer familiar suffering. No, they do. As long as it's their routine, they prefer it to surprise pleasure. And so they don't like change, and given the rate of change in our society, it's intolerable. So what they want to do is say halt. And some of them don't even want to say halt. They want to say, let's go back to what was. That's what was familiar. That's when we were comfortable. That's when we didn't have this thing called stress. Now, that resistance movement consisted of various people. Now, generally speaking, in the United States of America, the strongest centers of what we call conservatism. The word conservatism means you want to conserve the what? The pan. You want to conserve it. That's historical. You don't want to change it. So the strongest areas of conservatism were not necessarily the richest. They were the rural areas. The parts of the country that were most opposed to this change were to be found in rural communities. The most rural of the rural was the South. But in Michigan, we had lots of rural too. The area that was most urbanized in America, where you had the people who were most open to change, was the Northeast, all right? New England, New York, Pennsylvania. I mean, obviously there were pockets of people who were conservative, but that's where they were. And they now had to justify their resistance. Let me make a distinction here, and it's very important in terms of the abortion issue, because sometimes you end up in discussions that you can't win or they're irrelevant, because people never tell you their real reason for opposing something. In some cases, people don't know their real reason. We're celebrating the 150th anniversary of Freud. And one of the realities is that sometimes we do things and we do not know why we do them. We have some kind of respectable excuse in the front of our mind. And we say, well, that's why. We say, oh, that's why? And we get into an argument with people over their respectable excuse. So let me give you the excuses. Justifications are rationalizations. They may or may not be the real reason. The first, used all the time. There is a being in charge of the universe. His name is God. And God has written a book, or a series of books all put together. It's the Bible. And he has spoken through his deputies here on earth. And he has said very, very, very clearly what the role of women ought to be. And in fact, women who do not wish to be mothers, women who do not wish to get married, women who wish to restrict their reproduction, do you understand, are defying God's will. You still hear that? Right. Second reason, by the way, what people do with these excuses is they try to build them for the audience. So if you're talking to an audience where the word God means something, you go, that's powerful. But let's say you're talking to a sophisticated audience, a little more secular, whatever else it is. So now you come up with another excuse. Okay. Leave the house, go work. You understand? Leave your children alone. They need you. It's bad for parenting, do you understand? For women to assert their autonomy, to go out and make their life whatever else it is. Your job is to have children, to bear children, to raise them, to love them, and to nurture them, and to stay home to take care of them. Oh, well, that's a different argument. Got that? Different. And then the third, which was, now, you understand evolution, don't you? Well, evolution has arranged for two different roles, gender roles for men and women. Men are strong and intellectual. Even George Bernard Shaw, whom I like. No, I mean, do you understand? I'm not talking about, he called himself a socialist. Even he said this. Men are, you read in Don Juan in Hell, men are strong, smart, intellectual, whatever else it is. And the role of women, that's how the evolution occurs. There's no God in this argument. The way evolution occurs, they're just what? They're supportive. Men are the geniuses, and women are there to support the geniuses. Got this? Do you know that there are millions of men around the world who have been, I've been articulating this for a long time. Then you get one of the major arguments. One of the major arguments is patriotism. Your people, your nation needs children. And you selfish individual. I mean, already in the 19th century, they were noticing that the birth rates of rich people were declining. I mean, urban culture suppresses birth rates. So we need a fairly sizable population. And you're saying, well, I don't want to do it. Selfish. And last, of course, there came the argument that couldn't be articulated. It was discussed privately, but rarely publicly. On occasion, it would appear publicly. There's an intellectual at Harvard by the name of Samuel Huntington who certainly articulates it from time to time. What's his concern? His concern is all the original people in the United States of America, over half of them have become wealthy and prosperous, and they're not producing children. The Episcopalian birth rate, what? Ooh. The Presbyterian birth rate, ooh. The Congregational birth rate, ooh. Don't even talk about the Unitarian birth rate. I'm not sure it exists. And so they're disappearing. And that's why we need all these Hispanics, do you understand, running across from Arizona and New Mexico. And you, by your selfishness, are going to arrange for the culture, do you understand, of this country to be absolutely subverted. You with your birth control and your contraception and maybe your abortion. You into your, well, this is my life and I'm in charge of, yes. What is your social obligation? And you can see what the results. Within a few years, maybe 30 years, I don't know, the majority of the people in the United States of America won't be white. And in fact, they most likely will be speaking English and Spanish, and the whole thing is changing. So go right ahead. Pursue your happiness. Don't care about the group. I'm Jewish, and I haven't done anything about this. And you're always assaulted. What's going to happen? No. What's going to happen to the Jewish people? They're going to disappear and vanish. We've got this well-educated community. The birth control is suppressed. And we've got all these feminists running around saying, I'm going to do what I want to do. And they're pursuing careers, the women, and they can't have a baby until they're 45. So now what are we going to do? I mean, the arguments are not weak, by the way. Even people who are liberal, some of it can hit you and touch you. I mean, it's not that they're without some merit. But despite it all, and I want to tell you, the feminist movement was a success. When you look at where women were 100 years ago and where women are today, all right, in terms of their rights and their privileges and their self-image and whatever else it is, it's incredible. And the reason is we're part of an irresistible social system that's called globalization. And in fact, that's tied to the urban industrial system. And no matter what protests and resistances and whatever, you go forward, then you go back, then women did and how they perceived of themselves and their role. I mean, there's been an incredible success. But on the other hand, there's also been an incredible backlash, right? You can't have all this change and say there shouldn't be a backlash. There will be one. The question is, can the backlash prevail? Now, the backlash in the United States of America, certainly with regard to the issues of contraception and abortion, and they went together. They're tied together, and it's very important to keep them together in terms of what the opposition to this development is doing. There was a predictable backlash coming from the world of religion. The people in religion who were most concerned were generally the people in the Catholic Church, who were certainly opposed to all forms of birth control, artificial birth control, contraception. So there was a lot of resistance. I do want to tell you what happened to the establishment Protestant churches. They did a lot better, and they were rich, than the poor. You went down to central Alabama, they would agree with the Roman Catholic priest. But you go to Boston, to the Cabots and the lodges, they're organizing Planned Parenthood. It's the Republicans, by the way. It's those women. They were rich, do you understand? And they were well educated, and of course, in fact, the grandfather of the present president of the United States, Prescott Bush, was one of the main advocates of the Planned Parenthood agenda. So the other part, there was the Catholic resistance. The Protestant establishment, if you wanted to have a little Planned Parenthood meeting, you could always find an Episcopal minister, a Presbyterian minister, an Northern Baptist minister, a Reformed rabbi. I mean, you could always. Right? The other group wasn't very vocal. Catholics were in the major cities, and in fact, most Catholics were urbanized. So even if they were poor and working men, they were in environments where they could protest. The people out on the farm weren't that well organized. And a large part of the rural population that didn't like this change was located in the South. And the South was paralyzed politically because of the Civil War. It was attached to the Democratic Party. And therefore it was attached to a party in which the spokespersons were generally liberals. Did the liberals of the Democratic Party echo the sentiments of people in central Alabama and central Mississippi on issues of race? Whatever? The answer is no. But these people could not vote Republican. I mean, they'd get there, they've got to mark. They couldn't. Guilt. And then it all happened. It was part of the 60s. It's part of this political change. It was to affect the whole case of female liberation. These people were liberated. First, they were liberated by all the industry that moved down there from New England after World War II and gave them jobs. And then they were liberated by the fact that black liberation was around, and the Democratic Party embraced the civil rights movement, and now these people hated the Democratic Party, and they weren't going to stay in it anymore. They were sick and tired of the radicalism of the 60s, so they simply moved over and joined the Republican Party. And the Republican Party, because they came over, now experienced a surge of support in the country. The South had gone Republican. And now they had more money, and now they had ministers who could articulate their point of view, and out of it would come the religious right. And now, the greatest opponents, do you understand, to this change, to the feminist movement, doesn't lie in what I would call the conservative factions of the Roman Catholic Church, because the Roman Catholic Church was radically altered by Vatican Council II and is now hopelessly divided. It lies in the Protestant sects in the American South and those people who agree with it. And they are formidable, because the Republican Party is the party in charge of the United States of America, and in many cases, they are in charge of the Republican Party. All those people from New England, they're not in charge of the Republican Party. So now all the Republican leaders all speak with Southern accents, and now they find their flag. One flag of the Republican Party, which is the old one, which is the flag of the economic conservatives, is cut taxes and keep the government out of our economic business. Now, these were the people, including William Howard Taft, who was the President of the United States of America, who was a Unitarian. And, I mean, if Planned Parenthood had been around, he would have been what? He would have been in favor of it, right? So there's one message of the party is certainly that, which appeals to the economic conservatives. But now, in order to mobilize, there aren't enough rich people in this country to elect a president of the United States. You have to mobilize the poor, and the way you mobilize the poor is you have to address their anxieties. They do have an anxiety about money, but you can divert them from their anxiety about money by talking about change, morality. So now, that becomes a message the Republican Party never used, right? It's a message that appeared after 1964. And now, in order to get the attention of people, you have to choose a moral issue that'll get them excited. First of all, it has to be an issue having to do with women. No, because the liberation of women is very provocative, all right, in this culture. Very provocative. And then you have to choose an issue which also has a complication. By the way, the issue of contraception doesn't have a victim, right? So you either do it or you or you don't do it, and maybe you should be doing it and be having more children, whatever else it is. But abortion has this complication. There is a second being. It's called the fetus, whatever you want. It's certainly alive, right? So is it alive? And in order to have this abortion, which you're choosing because you're finding yourself stressed out, or you have other items on your agenda, or you're too poor, whatever it be, it doesn't make any difference. In order to have it, you have to kill this living thing. Leave out whether it's a person. It doesn't make any difference. Are you killing a living thing? Yes. Aha. Now you got an issue. Do you understand? I'm telling you, you get it? I mean, it's different from a lot of the other issues which simply have to do, well, I'll do my thing. Well, I'll do my thing, but I may not harm anybody. I'll just do my thing. In this case, there is a second being. So when you now present your argument has to do with, are you prepared to kill this living thing? It's living, whatever else it is. You know, I kill living things all the time. I step on ants. I regret it. I just don't see them. No, but we all do that. And I eat during the day. Most of us don't want to confront it because most of us don't kill the animals that we want. That we don't know that we eat. We eat. You're going to go out to lunch. Chew, chew, chew. What are you chewing on? We always try to avoid this because and that word is like a no-no. You can't say the word die in our culture, by the way. People never die. They pass on, they pass away, whatever. They never die. And you never kill. So that's by the way, is a very powerful issue. You got it? I mean, so you make that the flag, but you need a flag. If you have 1,200 flags, issues, nobody can focus. You have to choose them one by one. Do you understand? Then people can focus. So now this becomes the flag of this group. Their enemy is feminism. Their flag is abortion. And it has complications. So, the history of abortion, by the way, is in the agricultural world. It was frowned on, but it was tolerated. Certainly, if husbands consented, it was what? It was tolerated. Generally, since they didn't know anything about cells and DNA or whatever else it was, generally, they said that up until the quickening is when you feel something move or whatever else it is. It was presumed the soul was entering now into the baby, and so before that it was what? It was okay, and after that it wasn't okay. In some cases, they tolerated even when it was much further along. Didn't make a big issue. As long as, generally, there was male consent. But it was always something sort of clandestine. You didn't walk into the center of the village and say, you know what, I just had an abortion. When you do things of which you are a little bit ashamed, but that was it, then you what? Sort of secret. But it's tolerated. That is, it's done. And in fact, the definition, certainly in the Catholic world or the Western Christian world, of the beginning of life, when there is personhood, would be at the quickening. So now you're quite a few weeks into what we call the development of the child, and so that was it. However, in the middle of the 19th century, in America, there developed what I would call a movement that certainly had its roots in what I would call the traditional Protestant religion. But it was also articulated sometimes by educated professionals, including physicians, who made comments about the role of women. There was concern. You have to understand, in the middle of the 19th century, something was happening in America. What was happening in America was that hundreds of thousands of immigrants were coming into this country. It's the same as the issue with the Hispanics. And their culture was what? Different, and they weren't all blonde. Right. So, and now the Anglo-Saxon women were having fewer and fewer children. And there were people who articulated their anxiety. I mean, the wrong people are reproducing. So out of what I would call the anxiety that came out of the traditional society and this anxiety about cultural change came laws in 49 of the 50 states. Ultimately, there weren't, in the middle of the 19th century, there weren't that many states. All right, 49 of the 50 states, which banned...
Why do they call it a funny bone?
Why can't penguins fly? Like a sea turtle.
Can we go to the moon on vacation?
If you think it's tough answering these questions, imagine the ones you'll get if your child is diagnosed with cancer. CureSearch.org can help. It's run by doctors and scientists whose research has led to an overall cure rate of 78%. You're not as alone as you feel.
All right, 49 of the 50 states, which banned abortion. So I want to tell you something. The banning of abortion is not that old. Even in the traditional agricultural society, in some ways it was tolerated. People were not proud to do it, it was just tolerated. But in the middle of the 19th century, it's turned into a series of laws to be enforced by the government. And accompanying that will also be laws against contraception, artificial birth control. Simultaneously, and all of it has its roots in this great anxiety about social change. Because I want to tell you, globalization, which was already beginning, globalization it produces this incredible anxiety. You know, I hear this with people who say, well, they better speak English. Oh, that's very global. Okay. Anyway, so there's the banning, and now comes the justification. The official justification now has to do with killing. There is a living being there. Do you understand? Whatever it is. The Catholic Church ultimately said from the moment of conception, that was decided in 1869 by Pius IX, the Pope in Rome. That was not the official policy of the church before, because before it was quickening. But now it becomes conception. So now and the church also has great anxiety about what's happening to women. So, killing. Got it? No, it's the other side. No, it's not. It's not a person. Okay? So maybe it's not a person. Is it a living being that ultimately will turn into a... One can, by the way, arrogantly dismiss it and say, oh, ridiculous, horrible. But I do want to tell you, most of the American people are not on the side of the women who stand up and say, I am in charge of my life, and this is what I will do, and what I will do is what I will do. Thank you. Most of the American people have some anxiety about it. Should they? Maybe not. So they're saying, well, if she got raped, okay. If there was incest, what? Okay. If there's danger to her, what? Her health, okay. If she's going to have a nervous breakdown, well, what? Okay. But just getting up and saying, I'm me, maybe they should appreciate that argument. I'm just describing, do you understand? Because everybody's in what? In transition. So their argument, by the way, is not, it may not be valid, but it what? Is powerful. Because with the other issues, that complication does not exist. But despite that fact, because the wave of change expressed in the 60s carries the thing forward, and in 1973, the Supreme Court is emboldened to simply say, it's a right. Now, when you say right, it's very interesting. The most appealing kind of moral argument, I want to give it to you, is when you say, look, I'm not concerned about me, I'm concerned about my society. Okay? That's the most powerful moral argument. So if you present the argument and you say, well, you know what? If you allow me to have this abortion, it will have positive social consequences. Then that's appealing. If you simply stand up and say peevishly, well, it's me and it's my right, it may be your right. It's not good public relations. You understand the distinction? I'm not talking about the moral quality. I'm talking about the public. Let's say you're trying to persuade people to vote for you, because people are in transition. So now, January 22nd, 1973, Roe versus Wade becomes for the religious right. the enemy, the flag, it must be what? Overthrown. So they developed a series of strategies. The first, which is a good strategy, is the Supreme Court can reverse itself. So what we need to do is to elect conservative Republican presidents who will nominate conservative judges to the Supreme Court. Ultimately, some of these old liberals, they're going to go. Now, the problem was that some of the people appointed by Nixon, Ford, and even Reagan turned out to be disappointments to them. They thought they had what? Good conservatives. Once they got their jobs, they betrayed their appointer. But I do want to tell you, they're dying and going. And in time, if the Republicans can stay in power, and if the Republicans can be represented by what we would call a person sympathetic to the religious right that has great power in the Republican Party, then ultimately it will happen. Do you understand that strategy? So obviously for the people who wish to defend Roe versus Wade, it's very important for them to get somebody in the White House who will appoint different kinds of people when these other people are on their way to dying. The second strategy, they started it from the very beginning, was to pass restrictions in state legislatures and sometimes in the federal government that have fairly wide support. They don't cancel Roe versus Wade, but they simply what? They sort of restrict it. And starting from the very beginning, it happened until 1989, the court only made minor concessions. I mean, one of the issues which came up from the very beginning, and this was during the Carter administration, and he did not veto the bill. That is, can the government, federal or state, can the government, federal or state, deny funding to abortion? That doesn't deny the right to what? To have it. You simply are saying the government will not fund it. Well, the ones who said no, really gung-ho for Roe versus Wade, that's a betrayal. Except I want you to know the courts allowed it. Okay, you see? So now the idea is to shrink. If you can't ban it because you don't have enough people on the Supreme Court, you now what? You shrink it. So then the other thing is you now do the following shrinking. The second shrinking is you say, pass a law saying, yes, she can have an abortion. But she can't have an abortion until she gets a lecture and she sees a movie, about what the fetus looks like and what you are doing. You got to have that. And the courts allowed it. So now it's what? You understand? It's like chipping away at it. And then came the method. That was 1989. Webster versus Reproductive Health Services. That was a very important decision. The state of Missouri. Now, say, in the 20th week, we're going to test for viability. Now, according to the Roe versus Wade, there are trimesters, right? In the first trimester, go right ahead. In the second trimester, they may have the right to impose restrictions on the method. In the third trimester, which is viability, then generally what? No. Well, that's a possibility. So, but testing for viability in the 20th week is before the third trimester. So there was all this opposition, but I do want to tell you the law passed in Missouri. An overwhelming majority of the legislature passed it. And in fact, the court sustained it in 1989. Are you seeing how this thing is just bit by, are they canceling out Roe versus Wade? No, but they're what? They're cutting into the pieces. And then, what if you're a minor? Well, you got to tell your parents. And in fact, you have to have parental approval, consent, before you can have an abortion. So bit by bit, the thing has been sort of chipped at, all right? Cut into. And then, during the Bush Jr. administration, the law that was passed in 2003, which says, and they publicize this because obviously they made it a grisly thing, the method of extracting the baby through, first they used brain suction. Got that? Or already, what? Oh, police. Yes, she has the right to be in charge of her life, but not brain suction. So then they found a phrase that they thought was more powerful. It's called partial birth. Birth, which means the baby's about to be born and you're what? Killing it. So that law was passed in 2000. Do you see what's going on? I mean, I haven't given you all of them because there's so many of these laws and restrictions all chipped away at. Well, and then comes all this encouragement. Bush Jr. is elected the President of the United States, and in 2004, the year after the partial birth law is passed, in 2004, he wins the presidential election. How could it be? The war in Iraq, the whole thing. Answer, I'll give it to you. The message. More poor people voted for George Bush Jr. in 2004 than voted for the Democratic Party. And they voted for it because they were voting on an issue. The word that was used was values. And there's no doubt about it, the issue in Ohio and other places that gave victory to Bush was his opposition to gay marriage. So now it's very clear. One of the ways to mobilize the American people, even if you have a war that isn't being resolved, even if the economy isn't working that well, one of the ways to do it is how? To take this issue that comes out of the religious right in particular, it's called the issue of morality, whereby you can get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of votes among the poor, and use it as an issue. And then, well, Rehnquist dies and he'll be replaced by another conservative. All right. But then one of the swing votes, Sandra Day O'Connor, remember, from Arizona? So now they're emboldened. And with this new, do you understand? Now maybe we can not just chip away, maybe we can just what? Get rid of the whole thing. So somebody in South Dakota, without permission, now proposes a ban on abortion that obviously will be tested, ultimately go all the way up to the Supreme Court of the United States of America. And with the new constitution of the court, is it possible that Roe versus Wade can be reversed with all the consequences? If you want to know my opinion, come back in 5 minutes.
How do you convince a 14-year-old girl that hair doesn't matter? When the diagnosis is childhood cancer, where can parents turn? CureSearch.org can help. It's run by doctors and scientists whose research has led to an overall cure rate of 78%. You're not as alone as you feel.
Let me look at the realities of the situation. The first is that in this country, we are confronting the clash of two moralities. One is the morality of what I call the old agricultural world, and one is the morality of the urban, industrial, global society, and they're incompatible. And people on either side use the word moral, but what they mean by moral is what? Their perspective. I mean, and they're clashing. And one of the major issues of the clash is feminism. Feminism is not part of the old morality. And in fact, many people whose personal lives have changed radically, they're using computers, do you understand? They've had 2 divorces, it doesn't make any difference. They still are caught in this old value system. And in fact, part of them yearns to go back to it. And so ambivalence, you know, is a weakness in a sense that can be taken advantage of by politicians. 2, the abortion issue is a powerful issue. It is powerful because the argument is simply asserting your individual right to be in charge of your life isn't enough. You have to explain why you're disposing of this living thing which isn't an ant. It may not be a person. Do you understand? You have to explain. And to simply say, well, it's my right. You're not going to win a lot of points in Topeka. Now, it features all kinds of bizarre reasonings, you know. If indeed the person begins at conception, so now you got a fertilized egg, right? So you got all these, I don't know, there are 3 million, I don't know how many there are. They're all competing to get implanted in the uterus. So, right? You got to hang on there. I mean, you know. You got to get there. You got to hang on. Now, each one of them, if they are fertilized in some way, is a person. So now there are thousands of, I don't know, hundreds, how many persons in your uterus, right? They're all in this, they're trying to find a place to hang on. And in some cases, nobody what? Can do it. And in some cases, what? One of them, maybe 2 of them get connected. Do you think it's easy to be a fertilized egg? Woody Allen, by the way. No. As the sperm. Do you remember that? It's one of my favorite things. All right. So I may talk about that actually on June 26th. So these are all persons. So if indeed they are persons, if you have moral concern, you would want to retrieve them. Why would you allow them to die In fact, women have a moral obligation, if they're persons, right? They have a moral obligation to say, they have to subject themselves. Doctors have to be there right after the impregnation. Is that not the moral responsibility? And then go into the uterus and rescue as many of them as you can. Would you voluntarily, if you had the power to stop it, allow all these little fertilized eggs to die? You're a bad person. But see, what you don't expect in these arguments is consistency. And I'll tell you why. Because the real reason is never stated. They give you what I call this fancy reason. The real reason they have difficulty themselves articulating. It's like why people are in arguments and they give you the reason and you know it's not the real reason. Somebody's been insulted. Somebody's been demeaned. And their reason for not talking has nothing at all to do with, with what really happened and motivates them. You're talking about people going through social transition. And they don't like feminism, whatever else. They just don't like it. They don't like women asserting themselves. I mean, they don't like it. Now, that's not a respectable reason to articulate. So you find some other reason. And so you spend all your time arguing about the wrong thing. Because after you've won your argument, they have another one. They have a whole series of excuses. If you get through excuse 1, they've got what? Excuse 2. Doesn't make any difference. There are no perfect solutions in the end, and I must say, nobody wants to say it. It's all right. Sometimes killing is okay. Did you say that? Life doesn't have perfect solutions. Every decision you make in life has both good consequences and what? Bad consequences. And quite frankly, what you're saying is a person who is developed, the potential of which has been realized, and who is aware of his or her life or whatever else in her life, has priority, do you understand, over the other. That's all. I realize that I live in a world, it's part of our world. In order for us even to survive, we have to what? And sometimes when I eat my tuna salad, I think it is tuna fish. But you can't escape it. I mean, all we have is it's not a person, it's a little what? It's a fertilized, and maybe it's bigger now. It's the embryo, it's whatever else it is. Yes, you're destroying it. So we do all this cover-up. Whenever the issue is brought up, we just what? Well, it's nothing. There are the vulnerable poor. You will not reduce abortion by simply banning it. People will go and find it wherever they can. Rich people will go to places that are safe, and poor people they'll do it unsafely, that's all. I mean, it'll be done. Is that a good social consequence? One of the things I think that liberals have to work on is productive communication. Non-productive communication is stridency, which simply says, my right. You always have to explain why you're right, why what you do is good for the community. Because otherwise, what you appear as is selfish. This is me and my life, and I am pursuing my happiness. Do you understand? Not an appealing moral argument. Maybe people think it is. It's not. Now, there will be continued racial pressure. One of the things emerging, you have to understand, this community in the South, whatever it be, the base of the religious right, contains most likely the original, largely Anglo-Saxon inhabitants of America. They don't want Mexicans coming. They don't want people coming in. They don't want to see this country changed racially. And in fact, what they want to encourage is their own people to what? Produce more and more and more babies. In fact, what's happening now under the Bush administration, because the religious right is so much in power, there is a breakdown of the separation of religion and government, because obviously, if you are opposed to abortion on moral grounds, and the people who are best advocating that position are the clergy, you will send, no, they give them money. And all of that is attached to another thing which I find, in many cases, very insidious. I connected contraception with abortion. There is now appearing an extremist position in the religious right as they become more self-confident. The extremist position wants not only to ban abortion, it ultimately wants to get rid of contraception. And that campaign has been going on now for many years. By the way, it's a bigger issue because the issue isn't just abortion. The issue is the whole slew of ideas that are attached to what I call the feminist agenda. And what they're now doing, and you can see it. We will not fund any sex education, that's the government, that recommends the use of artificial birth control. The only legitimate way to control your sexual urge is abstinence. Right, abstinence. And in fact, there are many church groups that are receiving government money right now because they are the ones advocating abstinence. And in fact, we will not give any money to any international organization that recommends artificial birth control. Now, this is rather ironic. If you wish to reduce abortion, then you would what? Advocate contraception, because if people are going to do it anyway, then you understand? The best way is for them not to have babies. So, using condoms, using artificial birth control, whatever, birth control pills, whatever it be, will reduce and shrink abortion. One of the countries with one of the lowest rates of abortion is Holland because of its what? Very early, it promoted artificial birth control. And the countries with the highest rates of abortion are the countries where contraception wasn't easily available. That was true of the Soviet Union. That is, they didn't have the contraceptives, so if women didn't want babies, they what? They had abortions. Is this not ironic? The best method for shrinking abortion is to promote artificial birth control. But now they want to have their cake and eat it. Are they really interested in shrinking abortion? No, because they're confused. They have this anti-feminist, they have a whole series of issues. And now they want to push that second issue. And now, I'm telling you, there are millions and millions and millions of federal and state dollars now being spent on instructing people to abstain. a total waste of time. Yeah, and money. Thank you. I knew it was an incomplete sentence. Time and money. Thank you. Right. We have become, to some degree, the laughingstock of Europe, because in Europe, I mean, they can't even conceive of this issue. I mean, it's a very secularized culture. They've gone through the same globalization, but they don't have the same kind of protest movement. I mean, in Europe, the anxieties now do not have to do with morality. They have to do with immigrants. I mean, that seems to be the focus of anxiety. So we manage to alienate the Europeans because we can't even support programs which they regard as very important to benefit the people around the world. There's the AIDS problem. Abstain. I must say that this abortion contraception is going to remain part of the Republican banner. And I was very dismayed, by the way, to see that John McCain went to see Jerry Falwell, because he had denounced him. I mean, he was disliked very much by the religious right, but if you want the Republican nomination for the presidency, then indeed that's exactly what you will do. Now, I do want to say, you've got to put this all in perspective. If you look over the last 100 years, there has been, do you understand? Incredible progress. It's highly unlikely that the women of North America or Europe or whatever are going to go back to the 18th century. There is a self-destruct in what I call the religious right. The self-destruct in the religious right is the only way for them to achieve the morality they want is to go back to the old agricultural world. Like the Amish, and that they are not prepared to do. They're not prepared to do it. So what they want in Dallas, Texas, is to have the cars, to have the big houses, do you understand? To enjoy the luxuries of what we call the global culture, and simultaneously hope that the value system that came out of another world will control their daughters and their children. So if you develop a perspective in history, and I say this because sometimes people say, oh, it's all collapsing. It's not all collapsing. In the end, most of these people aren't prepared to blow up the global world. They make too much money from it. And if they don't want to blow it up, they can't restore that old value system because they really don't want to go back to living on the farm. So they will continue to cause trouble. But I don't believe, quite frankly, and sometimes we'll move back, and then we're going to move what? Forward, then we're going to move back, and then we're going to move forward, and so forth. I don't think they have the power because of this internal contradiction, ultimately, to prevail. That doesn't mean that if you find what they do objectionable, that you don't fight it. It simply means you don't fight it with absolute pessimism. I mean, you have to have some kind of perspective on history. So let me conclude by saying there are certain implications to be drawn from this. The first is that one of the winning items in the election will continue to be morality, whether you like it or not. In Georgia, just was it yesterday or something? Or was it today that I read it? They announced that a judge in Georgia declared that the amendment that was voted on banning gay marriage in Georgia was unconstitutional, or was conducted in a way, the poll, that was unconstitutional. Well, I want to tell you, the Republicans in Georgia who are in trouble will now pick up on this issue, and they will use it in the congressional election, in the election in this year of 2006. So it's an issue. It shouldn't be, but it was. There is a moral clash in this country. So now that's the challenge to the Democrats. If the Democrats indeed support abortion freedom, how do they explain it so that the vast center of the country, which is the key to what? To victory, can understand what they have to say? Is the best policy of the Democratic Party to continue simply to say, well, it's a woman's right? Well, they can say that. Or are they better off saying, you know what? There is a living thing involved, you understand? We understand. We don't do this with joy, this little inconvenient thing we have to get out of the way. We do it with a certain level of sadness, do you understand? Because life is a choice, and the logical, the reasonable choice is the person who what? Is fully developed, fully the person. But one doesn't say, well, it doesn't make any difference. Can't get the center that way. And the other is that one has to always talk about why it will be good for this country. I mean, abortion is not only for women who wish to conduct their life the way they want to, it's also for poor women who can't afford any more children. Isn't that a social? That's not just me asserting my rights. That's a social issue. It's also for people involved in the issues of rape and incest and illness and whatever. I mean, so it's compassion, right? Because the other side is always talking about compassion for this, the embryo, the fetus. The argument of the Democrats, if indeed they embrace it, it has to also have this element of the compassion has to be heard, as opposed to what I call the stridency. And that's going to be the challenge, because you have to change your propaganda. No, you have to change your propaganda, and that won't be easy, because I know the people who use the old propaganda. It will not easily and quickly be altered. So the question is, do I wish to be right and lose? Or do I wish to modify my propaganda and win? Well, we are in this world of abortion madness and the clash of two moralities, and thank you so much for your attention. Nomination for the presidency, then indeed that's exactly what you will do. Now, I do want to say You've got to put this all in perspective. If you look over the last 100 years, there has been, do you understand? Incredible progress. It's highly unlikely that the women of North America or Europe or whatever are going to go back to the 18th century. There is a self-destruct in what I call the religious right. The self-destruct in the religious right is the only way for them to achieve the morality they want is to go back to the old agricultural world. Like the Amish, and that they are not prepared to do. They're not prepared to do it. So what they want in Dallas, Texas, is to have the cars, to have the big houses, do you understand? To enjoy the luxuries of what we call the global culture, and simultaneously